Welcome to the Unraveling the Scriptures channel. As we know, Abraham was the ancestral patriarch of various peoples, among which the Israelites, the Ishmaelites, as well as the Midianites and Edomites stand out. All of these peoples are direct descendants of Abraham through his wives. An interesting aspect, which is rarely discussed in detail on the internet, concerns the 3 women Abraham was involved with. Who were these women? What were their ethnic characteristics, their origins, and where did they come from? What was each one's relevance to the biblical narrative? These and other questions will be explored in this video, where we will talk about Abraham's women. The women of Abraham: Sarah, Hagar, and Keturah. The story of Abraham's life begins in Ur of the Chaldeans, where he lived with his father Terah and his brothers, Haran and Nahor. After the early death of Haran, Terah decided to journey toward the land of Canaan. However, the journey was interrupted, and the family eventually settled in Paddan Aram, more specifically in the city of Haran. They remained in that region for a while. Later, Abraham is directly called by God, who instructs him to leave his family and relatives to go to a place that God would show him, the land of Canaan. This moment marks the beginning of a new chapter in Abraham's life, making him a central figure in the history of God's people. Abraham's journey is widely documented in the book of Genesis, where his lineage and role as a patriarch are highlighted. Abraham is described as a descendant of Arphaxad, from the lineage of Shem, which identifies him as belonging to the Semitic people. He was originally from the city of Ur of the Chaldeans, and his father, Terah, was also a direct descendant of the Chaldeans. The Chaldeans, in turn, were a people who traced their ancestry to Arphaxad, reinforcing their connection to the Semitic lineage. Abraham's life reflects not only a geographical shift, but also a spiritual and historical transformation. By answering God's call, Abraham becomes a symbol of faith and obedience, and his actions have a profound impact on the generations that follow. The divine promise he receives, that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky, lays the foundation for the development of the people of Israel. Furthermore, Abraham's journey demonstrates the importance of trust in God, even in the face of uncertainties and challenges. His departure from Haran to Canaan, guided solely by the divine promise, symbolizes the courage to leave the familiar in search of a greater purpose. This obedience not only shapes his personal story, but also the narrative of the covenant between God and humanity. Few people are familiar with the rich linguistic history of the ancient Semitic culture to which Abraham belonged. Many, unfortunately, mistakenly claim that he spoke Hebrew or Phoenician, which is not consistent with the sacred scriptures, the biblical geography, or the characteristics of the people of his time. Abraham, originally from Ur of the Chaldeans, where he lived with his father, spoke the Akkadian language. Later, when he settled in the land of Aram, he began to use Aramaic, a Mesopotamian language he was already familiar with. Abraham's first and primary wife, Sarah, is described as his most beloved companion. The name Sarah has an interesting meaning. In languages such as Assyrian, Babylonian, and Akkadian, it means queen. The sacred texts reveal the deep love between Sarah and Abraham, as well as fascinating details about her origin. Sarah was Abraham's half-sister, the daughter of Terah, and a Semitic woman from Ur of the Chaldeans, a descendant of Arphaxad through Shem. A rather intriguing detail found in the sacred texts concerns the appearance of Sarah. Despite being of advanced age, between 80 and 90 years old, Sarah continued to be admired and desired by the men of the land of Canaan and Egypt. According to the scriptures, her beauty was so remarkable that it caught the attention of princes and even the Pharaoh of Egypt. It is important to remember that these men, many of them kings and powerful princes, had harems filled with concubines and women of various origins, which makes Sarah's allure all the more impressive. There is no doubt that she was a Semitic woman of unique and notable beauty, even in her old age. Additionally, the Bible reports that at about 90 years old, Sarah became the mother of a son, Isaac. The name Isaac, in ancient Semitic languages such as Hebrew and Aramaic, carries the meaning of laughter, joy, or giggle, a reference to the joy and surprise of her conception at such an advanced age. Isaac was the second patriarch and ancestral father of the Israelite people, playing a central role in the continuation of Abraham's lineage. Revisiting the story of Sarah, one cannot overlook the intriguing rivalry between her and Hagar, Abraham's concubine, who also had great significance in the biblical narrative. Hagar is described in the scriptures as an Egyptian woman, a descendant of Mizraim. She was the mother of Ishmael, Abraham's firstborn. This rivalry between Sarah and Hagar emerges as one of the most emblematic conflicts in the sacred text. An interesting detail is the connection to the laws or customs of Nutsi, which reflect the Semitic cultural practices of Abraham and Sarah's time. These customs explain part of the family and social dynamics depicted in the biblical narrative, reinforcing the historical and cultural importance of this period. Sarah, understanding the Semitic laws, allowed her Egyptian servant, Hagar, to lie with her husband, Abraham. According to the laws of Nutsi, predominant among the Semitic peoples, the child conceived by Hagar would not be considered the servant's child, but rather Sarah's. This practice was common and legitimized by the traditions of the time, ensuring that, in cases where the wife could not bear children, the servant could be given to the husband as a concubine. The child born from this union would be recognized as the legitimate heir of the wife, securing the continuation of the family line. In this context, Ishmael, the son of Hagar, was recognized as Sarah's child, according to the Semitic traditions. However, these same laws also established that the concubine should be treated with dignity and in many cases was elevated to the status of a secondary wife. This is exactly what happened with Hagar, who, after giving birth, assumed a position of higher prestige within Abraham's tent. However, her decision to proclaim herself as Abraham's first wife created an inevitable conflict with Sarah, who already held that role. This clash led to intrigues and rivalries which are deeply narrated in the sacred texts. Although we know little about Hagar's history, the scriptures point out that she was an Egyptian woman, a descendant of Mizraim. Curiously, Hagar's Egyptian name was not recorded, but Hagar is a well-documented name in various ancient traditions. It appears on archaeological tablets found in Ebla, reinforcing its historical and cultural relevance. Names like Sarah, Abraham, and even Adam and Eve are also widely recorded, highlighting the importance of these characters to the narratives of Semitic traditions and other cultures of the region. The choice of Hagar as Abraham's concubine reflects the social and religious customs of the time, where the concept of lineage was central to family and community identity. Semitic laws were strict in establishing the rights and duties of each individual within the family structure, but at the same time, they allowed for complex dynamics between those involved. Thus, the episode of Sarah and Hagar illustrates how these traditions shaped interpersonal relationships and perpetuated values that marked generations. The relationship between Sarah, Hagar, and Abraham also demonstrates the weight of cultural traditions and rivalries that arose in contexts where social roles overlapped. Sarah, despite being the legitimate wife, had to deal with Hagar being in an elevated position, while Hagar, though initially a servant, assumed a position of greater authority after the birth of Ishmael. According to the scriptures, Hagar, despite being an Egyptian woman immersed in the polytheism of her culture, came to know the true God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. Her encounter with Sarah and Abraham was a turning point in her spiritual life, leading her to abandon the many gods she had once worshipped and to believe in the Creator, the one true God. This conversion process not only transformed her faith, but also positioned her as a singular figure within biblical traditions. By adopting the belief in the God of Israel, Hagar began to experience profound spiritual encounters. The Bible records that she had direct contact with heavenly beings, angels sent by God, who comforted her and brought significant promises. These angels assured her that her descendants would be numerous and that 12 princes would come from her. establishing the foundations of the 12 Ishmaelite tribes. These promises demonstrate how Hagar was included in the divine plan, even though she was a foreigner and initially outside the context of the covenant established between God and Abraham. Hagar not only became the mother of Ishmael, but also a living witness of God's mercy and care. In times of difficulty, such as when she was cast out by Sarah and wandered in the desert with her son, she cried out to the Lord and was heard. God provided water and sustenance, reaffirming his promise of protection and prosperity for her and her son. These events not only highlight divine intervention, but also emphasize the personal relationship that Hagar developed with God. Hagar's conversion is emblematic in showing that faith in the true God transcends cultural and religious barriers. Her story represents the inclusion of peoples beyond Israel in God's divine plans, pointing to the vastness of God's love and plan for all humanity. Hagar, an Egyptian woman, became part of a greater sacred story, contributing to the fulfillment of prophecies and the formation of a lineage that would have a lasting impact on the history of the Middle East. After Hagar left with Ishmael, Abraham found himself alone again, as Sarah had also passed away. In this context, with Isaac about to marry, Abraham, now a widower and lonely, decided to take a new wife. This woman was initially his concubine, as had been the case with Hagar. This practice was culturally acceptable for Abraham as a Semitic man who could have more than one wife. We know that Hagar had left, and Abraham took another concubine to be his wife. This woman was Keturah, whose name stands out in the narrative because she was elevated to the role of wife. After a brief period as a concubine, Abraham officially formalized his union with Keturah, granting her the status of second wife after Sarah's death. Thus, Abraham married again, this time to Keturah, who had originally been his concubine. There has been an ongoing debate among many about the origin of Keturah, with some mistakenly arguing that she was Hagar. However, this idea has no support in the scriptures, which clearly distinguish between the two women. Regarding Keturah's origin, it can be traced through her name. Etymologically, the name Keturah means committed, bound, or destined for marriage in Aramaic. This meaning is quite significant and provides clues about her identity. An interesting detail is that in excavations carried out at Ebla, tablets were found where the name Keturah appears. This suggests that her origin traces back to ancient Syria, known as Aram at the time. This historical and linguistic connection strengthens the importance of Keturah and her distinction from Hagar. Therefore, she was an Aramean woman, just like Rebekah, Isaac's wife, who also came from the land of Aram. Some even speculate that Keturah might have been a servant of Rebekah, accompanying her when Rebekah married Isaac. This is plausible, considering that the time between Isaac and Rebekah's marriage and Abraham's union with Keturah is relatively close. The book of Genesis tells us that Abraham had about 6 children with Keturah, as mentioned in chapter 25, verses 1 and 2. Abraham married another woman named Keturah. She bore him 6 children: Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shuah. These were the children Abraham had with Keturah. I thank everyone who has followed the video up to this point. To summarize, the women that Abraham married were: first, Sarah; second, the concubine Hagar; and third, his second wife, Keturah. May God bless you all, and I'll see you soon.